Hello everybody and welcome to Woopercast. This is episode 14 for August the 11th, 2016. As always, I'm your host, Joe Yates. So the World Championships, pretty big tournament. It's coming on next weekend and we're all very excited about it. All the points the players have been earning from league challenges all the way up to national championships have all been for this moment. It's all been to qualify for this tournament and to compete for the top prize of probably a ton of prize money, probably some cool ass booster boxes and promos, but most important of all, their name in the history books. This is the one where the big names really show up. So we're going to see some extremely high level play, and it's going to be really important that we make our predictions now and we sort through what decks are going to be good and what decks are going to be bad. So to help me do this in this week's preview is going to be Nick Pearce, who you probably know from his own YouTube channel of Xanatu TCG and also from his recent work commentating the European Nationals on the Pokemon live streams. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so, first of all, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem at all, man. So, for viewers who aren't fully familiar with you, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. So I'm Nick Pearce. You may also know me as Xanatu TCG on YouTube. I do have my own channel as well. I was also a commentator for the free European TCG Nationals live streams, so UK, Germany, and Italy. I've been playing the Pokemon trading card game competitively since the end of 2011. So I've been around for not forever, but for quite a bit.
Quite a long time. Probably a lot longer than a lot of other people anyway.
Yeah, I guess so.
So I will have links to all of Nick, Xanatu TCG, all of that stuff will be in the description. So if you want to check out more from him, you can do so down there. All right. So of course, this episode is all going to be about the World Championships and what we think is going to be the best deck to play on the day and what we think is going to take home it all. So first of all, the tournament structure for the World Championships is a little bit different to a lot of other tournaments that we've seen this season. And of course, this means that we have a day one, where in order to progress, you need a record of X and 2, so you're only allowed to lose 2 games. And on day 2, it's structured like normal Swiss. So what do you think the main differences are between day 1 and day 2?
So for day one, because there's really no extra benefit to having a better record than X2, because that's just what gets you to day 2. You just want to play a deck where you're going into that tournament and you're saying to yourself, I know that this deck can win 5 matches of Pokemon, and it's consistent enough to do that. And even if the deck has, say, like 1 or 2, maybe even like 2 near orthodox matchups or whatever else, I know that in any other matchup I can set up and I can win that match. And in 5 out of 7, I use that as an example because it was 7 rounds in Worlds last year. And as long as your deck is consistent enough to do that and you can play it to the best of your ability to do that, then that's really the thing that matters most.
Yeah. You yourself will be playing in day 1, that's correct, right?
Yes, I will.
Awesome. So we'll be rooting for you, of course, from here.
Thank you.
So yeah, there is a lot to choose from between day 1 and day 2. A lot of viable decks are available at the moment. And of course, you can switch decks between day 1 and day 2, so you don't have to stick to the same thing. That's a very important thing to remember as well.
Yeah, it is. In fact, to that, I'd sort of add that once you're in day 2, of course, the atmosphere kind of changes a little bit, because you're not just thinking to yourself, oh, I just want to make sure I make it through. You're thinking, if I'm aiming for the top, then suddenly your mindset can change to, I could play something which is really, really ballsy, and I know that I'm either going to go completely bust or I'm going to top or win Worlds if I play this deck, and there's going to be no middle ground.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's something else to think about as well.
Yeah, that's probably where the rogue decks and stuff like that will show up then, I guess. Anyway, onto the decks themselves. We've got quite a few sort of top-tier decks that I think that could do pretty well in this tournament. The first one is probably the most hyped of them all, with good reason. That's obviously Night March. This is the one that everyone's talking about, the one that everyone thinks is going to do well. And it's really not too hard to see why. It's been dominating the format all year, right from probably like November, October onwards.
But no, wait, Joe, what are you talking about? The deck is so bad. It plays 4 of a card which literally does nothing except sit in the discard pile.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know why people don't run the Litwick. That's how you beat Jolteon, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And the basic Psychic Energy, man. It's just 4 DCE. People don't think this through. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, you're meant to be playing basic Psychic from you anyway, so no.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, you only play that for the encounter attack, so whatever. Anyway,
I feel like I have to purge my mouth out. It was so bad to saying all of that.
Yeah, go back to being a good player now for the rest of this video. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways you can play Night March, and we've seen it being built in a lot of different ways. What kind of variant of Night March do you think will do well?
So
And not a Litwick variant now.
Yeah, definitely not that. But serious answer, it is kind of tricky to say. The thing is about the World Championships is that, of course, it is, as the name implies, a World Championship. So you have people from all over the world coming in, and they'll be playing their different variants of Night March. Sure, because the World is always in the US, there's always like a bigger representation of US players. So if you're talking about the sort of influence that will have, then we saw, and the list that actually ended up winning the nationals in the US was, of course, the Nick Robinson, who was playing the free Vespiquen line, and those are the sorts of night march lists that we saw doing really well at US nationals. If that trend continues, then that's probably the sort of list we're going to see do well at the World Championships as well. But of course, because everyone else will be coming in from all over the place, we're probably going to see a lot more variety in the kind of Night March variants being played.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very good way of putting it. There are an awful lot of different ways to play Night March, but in summation, we really don't know what everyone else is going to show up with, because you can't just keep it to your local area or anything when the World Championships. I think really any variant of it ends up being strong. I think if you've done your testing and you know your stuff, you can counter for an awful lot of decks, and there really isn't anything with a highly positive matchup against Night March. Like, say for Vespiquen Vileplume or Trevenant or something like that, and even those can still lose to it.
Yeah, mainly just by going second. The coin flip has a really huge influence on these sorts of things. And also, I should add the caveat earlier to any variant, apart from the Litwick variant, we cannot stress that enough. Please don't.
The Litwick is the secret tech that nobody's thinking of right now, I swear. Yeah. So that kind of brings us on to the question of, is it too hyped? Is there sort of like too much sort of expectations for Night March, and do you think people are going to prepare for it? But even if they do, how do you prepare for it?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, yes, of course, it's the most hyped deck, and you know there are going to be people playing counter decks, but these are the really huge thing. Even the counter decks can still just lose to it. Even like, I think if you can think of the most optimal sort of deck that's still a decent deck and is a really good counter to Night March, I would put good money on it still only being 60-40, maybe 65-35 in that other deck's favor.
That'd be probably Vespiquen Vileplume, I would say, is the best matchup of any, like, you know, meta deck that can beat Night March, and yeah, Night March can beat that. It just goes first. Yeah. No, it's ridiculous. And now it's get Ranger to work with, so beating Giratina has become even easier. Mega Rayquaza's one way of beating Night March that never happens anyway is now definitely not going to happen. Yeah, the Ranger chain makes just a nice addition. What about Special Charge? Have you been trying this in Night March?
I haven't, but I can see the merit. I think if you're playing Special Charge, then what you probably end up doing is just cutting puzzles entirely and fitting in room for other tech cards, because I don't think playing both in combination is necessary. Having said that, I think that not playing puzzles is suboptimal, so I wouldn't do it.
I would agree with that. You have to play the puzzles. I mean, you're getting back way more than just double colorless energy with them. From my own experience so far, it's been like, it's cool if you fit it in, but ultimately, like, people have been winning with Night March without Special Charge for ages now. They haven't needed it, and they don't. You don't need it. That's the thing. Is like, you can play it without it. It's a nice luxury to have. It's a nice thing to fall back on, but you don't need it. And do you really want to be including a card in your deck that you absolutely don't need, especially one as tight as Night March?
Yeah, there's just too many other important slots to cover other matchups that you would include over Special Charge, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. Captivating Pokepuff is something I quite like, because the mirror is going to be big, and in the mirror match, Pokepuff is really good. So basically, if your Joltik gets Sky returned for the knockout, that's a play that happens a lot in the mirror. Well, you can just bring the Shaman back down and kill that. But that's really the only situation when it's useful.
Yeah, either that or just hoping to get lucky off of going first and playing and hoping that they have the Shaman in hand instead of the Ultra Ball. But that's not always going to happen. So I don't think it happens often enough to justify it. So
yeah, you'd need an awful lot of luck to make it happen outside of that one niche situation that I was describing. Yeah. Controversial opinion, I think it's going to do pretty well.
Oh yeah, I don't know. It's a bold statement, but yeah. In all seriousness, literally no one will be surprised if this deck wins Worlds. I feel
literally nobody. Yeah. Everyone.
Maybe that one person who is just convinced that Night March is terrible at your local league or whatever. Yeah. But apart from them, yeah.
I think if anything, I'd be surprised if it didn't make top 8.
Yeah.
Trevenant is the next deck I wanted to talk about. This is one of the few decks with a positive Night March matchup. I'm not going to say an auto win, just a positive Night March matchup. Yeah. This is a deck I really like. We've seen it sort of dominate European nationals, do really, really well over those this season. And now that Steam Siege is out, it doesn't really gain anything from Steam Siege. It doesn't really lose anything from it either. I think it kind of stays the same, much the same as it is. And, well, it's currently a pretty good deck.
Yeah, it will win on the same strengths that it's won on up until now. Just turn one Wally into Trevenant going first, or even just going second and getting a really consistent Trevenant out. It's item lock is just inherently super super strong, and there's just no getting around that. And the fact that you can just win against Night March like matchup by going first and doing Wally means that you could just win so many of your games on a day by doing that.
Exactly. And like you were talking about day 2 plays where you want something that can just sort of be a bit ballsy and just sort of pick one of the popular matchups and really excel at it. That's the kind of deck you'd be looking at for that kind of stuff. Is Shaman EX, the new promo one from Generations, which is of course a basic EX, has this ability where you get to heal 20 damage from each of your basic Pokemon per turn. Kind of screws with both of Trevenant's main attacks. Do you think this could be something that players would tech to sort of help them beat Trevenant?
Yes, I more actually feel that it's a bit like the Pokemon Ranger situation where against some decks. I think the presence of it alone, the fact that it's been printed and it will be legal for Worlds, means that some people will be a little bit more wary about playing Trevenant because it really just put a massive hindrance to your damage output because it's the item lock combined with the really constant clock pressure put on by Silent Fear that makes the deck so good. And so Shaman being able to ease that makes it makes Trevenant not as scary, I guess, even though obviously it still has a lot going for it.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. I think it's hard to tech. There aren't a whole lot of decks that run exclusively basic attackers. And in Night March, do you really want to cut a space out of your Shamans, out of your 4 Shamans for it? Do you really?
Well, yeah, that's an important thing to remember. Of course, is that I don't think you'd play it in Night March anyway. But even if you wanted to, it would mean that because they both have the same name, Shaman and EX, you'd have to cut one of your 4 if you're playing it. The setup Shamans.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to counter to it as Trevenant, you could run Silent Lab. This is something I kind of like as a 1 or 2 of, because you don't technically need the Dimension Value out all the time with it. I wouldn't cut a Dimension Value for it necessarily, so it'll be hard to find the space for it, but I don't know, I like the idea of Silent Lab.
Yeah, I don't know if it ultimately will be worthwhile. I think that a lot of the time you maybe just hope that they don't play it. I'm not sure how many people will play it either. That's the other thing.
Actually, as a European player as well, actually getting hold of this card might be kind of difficult because it's only out in America, isn't it?
Yes, it's a bit unfortunate that that's happened. Yeah. Because of course with the box coming out in the Pokemon Center, that is the official US release, but yeah, we don't get that. We don't get the Generations Trainer box until September. So
yeah. One deck that Trevenant does kind of on paper have a bad matchup against anyway, and now Trevenant can just beat anything by going first and getting turn 1 item block. That's how Trevenant operates. It's meant to make your opponent draw badly. That's the point. But AquaBox can be kind of an issue for it. AquaBox sort of seems to have some pretty solid matchups across the board. Even looking at Night March, Quaking Punch is just extremely strong in itself against that deck. So what do you think of AquaBox?
I think that it's... Of course, when we talk about AquaBox, we have to mention Pokemon Ranger. Of course, that card does counter 3 of the attacks in the deck. It stops Crystal Ray from Glaceon. It stops Resistance Blizzard. Actually, 4 if you count. It stops Chilling Sigh as well. You never know.
Wait, does it stop Chilling Sigh?
Oh, wait, no.
I don't think it does stop Chilling Sigh, actually.
No,
okay.
I'm being silly. Ignore me.
But other than that, actually, wait, you can use it yourself, right? If you attack with Aurora EX, its attack says you can't attack next turn.
Yes,
but if you play the Ranger...
There are 4, yes, there we go. That's what I meant.
So and obviously Quaking Punch.
I feel so bad for saying that, and yeah, of course, Quaking Punch as well.
We know what you meant. We know what you meant.
Yeah, but yeah, going on to Quaking Punch specifically, the thing about it is that it's hard to chain Ranger against Quaking Punch, because the reason why Ranger is good against, and I imagine we'll probably talk about this later, decks like Giratina, is that it's very easy to just Versus Seeker for it to use it again, but against Seismitoad, you'd have to draw into it, have it in hand, play it, then have another Versus Seeker straight away to follow up to bring it back into your hand, because otherwise next turn you just get Quaking Punched and you can't reuse it.
Yeah, and essentially at that point, if you're only playing Ranger as your supporter, then you're not item locked, but you are supporter locked because you have to keep playing Ranger.
Yeah, in a manner of speaking. I mean, you can just Shaman, to be fair, but
yeah, you can still Shaman, obviously, but
it means you can't Lysander or stuff like that, which is obviously equally important.
So yeah, I don't know. I think Ranger is kind of one of those cards that it's better against the tech attackers of AquaBox. Like Regice, like you were saying, it kind of really helps out against that. Against Glaceon, maybe a little less so, because Glaceon has the higher HP, meaning you might need to Ranger twice to actually kill it, which could be a thing that could come up. But ultimately, do you think Ranger's going to make people not want to play AquaBox?
If I'm being honest, originally I thought yes, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually no. I think AquaBox has still got enough going for it that it's still a pretty strong pick for Worlds, to be honest. And if we want to talk about what attackers you'd play in it, the ones that are available, I don't think you'd play Auroras at this point because I think that was mainly in there for Greninja.
Oh
and
yeah,
Greninja
I think we should all agree that Auroras is not being played in AquaBox anymore.
Yeah, which is a shame because that card is really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's a very cool card, and like as soon as I saw the article from the Brazilian regionals where AquaBox first became a big thing, first thing I did was go to eBay and buy an Aurora CX because there's no way I'm not playing that. It's too cool.
Yeah, but I think you also, because of Ranger being an easy counter to Resistance Blizzard, I think you probably cut Redos as well. Glaceon, as you mentioned, it's a little bit harder in terms of that to counter it with Ranger, and I also feel like it has other uses outside of that as well. So I feel like Glaceon is still worth a slot. Against Vespiquen Vileplume, they won't have Versus Seeker, so they can't reuse Ranger anyway, and Glaceon gives you a good chance against that. Which is handy as well if you don't want to play Aegislash EX, which you could play. I think it's actually, if you are fearing Vespiquen Vileplume a lot, I think that a lot of people might, maybe especially for day 2, would play that, as we mentioned, the ballsy play. Then one Aegislash could be a good consideration. But other than that, yeah, really just Seismitoad is your main attack, obviously. Articuno for Night March. Glaceon,
Hoopas, Shamans, all that standard stuff.
Yeah.
I like the Aegislash EX, like you were saying, because it's one card out of your list that turns an auto loss into a, you know what, I could probably win this if I just find this. And a lot of Vespiquen Vileplume players might not be tagging for Aegislash because there aren't a whole lot of decks on this list that would run Aegislash, which is kind of cool. So yeah, it could be kind of a nice play that could win you a game. So it might be worth a slot.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And the other thing about AquaBox is it's one of the few decks that can actually take advantage of that new Shaman EX that we were talking about earlier. Do you think you should play it? In addition to Rough Seas, let's just bear in mind.
I'd say no. I'd say no for 2 reasons. First of all, you can play 4 FCs on its own. I think is normally enough to win against Trevenant anyway. Second of all, even if that isn't enough, what is enough is, and this is to do with matchup approach that I think a lot of people when they play AquaBox aren't aware of. Against Trevenant, all you really need to do is find your 2 mana for EXs and just keep mineral pumping between them, and they can just never do enough damage to actually KO anything that you put out.
Yeah, that between that and the Rough Seas, you should be fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
So I don't know. I like the deck. I think it's got some pretty cool matchups. Would you be sort of expecting to see it in the top 8?
I think 1 at least. Again, if it's in there, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if it wasn't in there either. But it's still, I think, too strong to. I'll say 1 will make top 8 at Worlds.
Yeah, I would think I'd be on the same side there with you. Like if it didn't make it, I'd be like, yeah, well, okay, that's not too much of a surprise. But if it did make it, I'd also be like, yeah, I could see that happening. You know. I don't think it would surprise anyone to be there.
100% agreed.
So one of the decks that does basically beat AquaBox if it's not running Aegislash, of course, is Vespiquen Vileplume. This is a really interesting deck, I think, because it's kind of fallen off the radar. I don't think a lot of people picked it up, other than Tamao Cameron, of course, who won UK Nationals with the deck. I think it's an extremely strong deck. I think it can counter for some of the matchups that it loses in. I quite like it, and of course, it's got that amazing Night March matchup.
Yeah, it is. I cannot emphasize it enough, especially for day 2. It is the ballsy play. If you're going to day 2 and you're thinking to yourself, I am going to completely bomb, or I'm going to top 4 win Worlds, you play this deck 100%.
Yeah, the ballsy play is the best way to name this thing.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the other thing I'd add to that is if you decide that that's me and you do want to play this deck, practice over and over with it again in terms of getting the sequencing right for how you set up with that deck, because that is the most important thing more than anything else as well.
Yeah, we actually did a video over on Nick's channel, and I'll link that in the description as well, on sequencing, so go to there for some tips. But yeah, Vespiquen Vileplume is one of the most heavy, reliant on sequencing, especially for that first few turns. Like, the first turn, I mean, essentially, when you want to get the Vileplume up, and that's something that a lot of people, really need to practice and really need to get down 100% to be able to get the turn 1 lock, and not just get the turn 1 lock, but also make sure they don't cripple themselves in the process, because that's the deck is sometimes its own worst enemy.
Yeah, because if you go a bit too enthusiastically in trying to evolve into the Vileplume, you'll leave yourself in a position where you don't have enough stuff in your discard pile to actually KO things with your Vespiquen, and then at that point they can just slowly attach energy and KO your stuff before you can KO them. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you do have to remember your item locking yourself with the thing.
Yeah.
I think there are ways it can tech around, the 2 big things that beat this deck are, or the two big ways to beat the deck are Fright Knight of Eltal and Aegislash-EX, and both of which are beaten by Silent Lab. I think this is quite a nice tech, and in my own list, I do have a Silent Lab in there, and I really enjoy playing it. What about you? Do you think it's a good call?
Well, it's Tamao. We were talking about him earlier. He posted up a list recently on CCG, his revised Vespiquen Vileplume list, and it was basically his nationals list with like one of the only one, maybe two changes was that I think he cut Bunnelby and he added in Silent Labs. So I think it has a lot of merit because especially if they're just sitting there and having to war with Aegislash and then I don't know deck you out. I mean a lot of the time they're just using it to set up attackers behind, but if they do that, then you have time to set up yourself and just slowly but surely draw into your Silent Lab and then just play it down for that big knockout.
Yeah, I think even as a one-off, you can get a lot of use out of it because a lot of decks only take the one Fright Knight or only have the one Aegislash-EX, or even are only able to get out the one copy of it because they are item locked after all.
Yes, definitely.
I don't think personally I'd cut a Bunnelby for it. I really like the Bunnelby in the deck. I think it's such a key player for it. If anything, I'd go up to 2 Bunnelby personally. But I really like the Bunnelby synergy with Silent Lab because it means you can sort of recycle it if you have to, or if you discard it, of course, like early on, you can get it back.
Yeah, that is true as well. I guess I have to ask Tamao about that one.
Yeah. One other thing you can play in the deck, but you shouldn't because it's worse than AZ in every way, is Olympia. Basically, if Fright Knight locks you in the active, you can play Olympia to switch out of there, and you keep your float stone. With AZ, you lose the float stone, or if you don't have Forest in play, it doesn't work at all because you can't play it back down. But Olympia will get you out of the active spot for Fright Knight. So there you go.
The sick tech choices coming out now.
Personally, no, I mean I wouldn't run it at all, except post rotation Vespiquen Vileplume, but that's for a whole other day.
Yeah, well, because AZ rotates anyway. But then again, Battle Compress also rotates, so I don't know if Vespiquen Vileplume will even be around after Worlds, at least not in the same way it is now.
Oh no,
I could be wrong.
I'm fully willing to give it a shot, but I don't think it'll be as powerful as it is now for sure.
I think the best way to put it is I have my doubts.
That's actually exactly how I have it right now.
Yeah.
So do you see it doing well at the tournament? I personally think that it would take a player who knows it well and who has practiced with it an awful lot to do well with it.
I would not be surprised at all someone won well to this deck.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. And I'll say something else as well. If by some miracle I actually do make day 2, I would seriously consider playing this as well.
Yeah, I can't really argue with you on that one. I mean, it seems like this is the day 2 pick. But if everybody thinks that, maybe everyone's going to run an Aegislash or a Fright Knight, so who knows?
Yeah, possibly as well.
So make sure you got your tech in there. All right, so moving on to a different Vespiquen variant, and one that I've played this season myself, one that I played at UK Nationals, is Vespiquen Zoroark. This is something that I kind of set it up at the time to beat a lot of the meta, the popular decks in the meta, and anyone who's played it kind of knows that this is really what it's built to do. And if we look at the top 4 decks that we've actually just talked about, which was Night March, Trevenant, AquaBox, and Vespiquen Vileplume, Vespiquen Zoroark has a way to beat all of those. Fright Knight for Vespiquen Vileplume is basically your plan there. You can run higher counts of it if you want. It's got an AquaBox you just smack around. But it's got really good matchups across the board, I think. It needs a lot of practice. The list is kind of hard to get down, and there's an awful lot of room for personal interpretation. But I think some of the European players, like in Austria and Germany, this deck was quite popular there, and some of them might pick it up.
Yeah, it's again the sort of deck where it does have a bit of a favor against Night March, but Night March can still beat it quite easily, which is annoying. But it is really fun actually, and it's a sort of deck that has a lot of different options, and a lot of people when they go into a tournament setting, they want to play a deck that gives them a lot of different avenues of play. So if that's your kind of thing, then yeah, it is maybe the deck for you.
Yeah, no, you will be announcing a lot of different attacks with this, especially if you run Zoroark Break. You'll be announcing so many different ones.
Yeah.
I like it. I can't see it doing well. I'd be very surprised if it did do well, but I think anyone who's played it before and knows the deck well could do very well with it.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
And that kind of goes for Dark on the whole. So we're going into Dark stuff now with YZG, Straight Zoroark, that kind of stuff. Personally, I think these decks rely heavily on player experience. Players who have played these decks the whole season, or if it's a Veltal EX, even before that's been around for 3 or 4 years now, probably, or something like that. Yeah. I think these are the ones where it has 50-50 matchups across the board, but in order to get the most out of it, you need to play absolutely perfectly.
This, I think, a great example comes to mind in the form of Scott Burgess.
Yeah.
He came second at UK Nationals, and very marginally could have won it as well quite
Yeah, and he
easily.
did win
And
nationals like 3 years ago, didn't he?
he won it in 2014.
2014. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I played Scott myself at nationals, and like that was he's the best opponent I've ever faced during the game. It was a really eye-opening experience just playing him because I was like, this guy is so many levels ahead of me. It was quite nuts.
Yeah. If someone, and again, it goes back to what you're saying about playing player experience. If someone well-known, big name, just rocked up with this for Day 2 of Worlds and made top 8, no one would be surprised, I think.
No, and you probably look at them and say, oh yeah, he played Dark at like this other tournament like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Like Ryan Morehouse or someone like that who's just notorious for playing the deck.
Yeah. So in fact, there's a Woopercast top tip. If you're in the UK and you're feeling like you want to play Dark Worlds, just go to your local registry office, just change your name to Ryan Morehouse, and you're in for a good time.
It's good luck apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Dark. I mean, really, looking at all the matchups, it can beat these things. Like Night March, again, it's 50-50, probably less than 50-50. If you're a good player and you know your stuff, you can win it though. Trevenant on paper you should beat, but we know how that goes. AquaBox, I feel like if Eltali X and Zoroark are both very good attackers against that deck. And even Vespiquen Vileplume, you've got the Fright Knight, so I think it has answers for pretty much anything.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say.
All right. So another kind of dark-based deck is Darkrai Giratina. This is the newest deck out of the format that we've had so far. It's new, but we still know what it does by now. We've all gotten used to it. What do you think about this one?
I really like this deck, to be honest. But, and this is a big but, Pokemon Ranger is a problem. And Pokemon Ranger is a problem because Giratina is a strategy that this deck would often use against Night March to do well against it. Just Chaos Wheel and stop them from being able to attach double colorless energies. But Pokemon Ranger, Giratina does not stop items, of course. So even under Giratina lock, the Night March player can still very easily versus it with Pokemon Ranger, and then they can attach the double colors again and KO the Giratina. That's the issue, really.
Yeah, Ranger coming out kind of means that the one avenue it did have to beat the most popular deck that will be at this tournament, let's just say it right now, it's not going to happen. And I think its Night March matchup becomes exponentially worse as a result. I mean, you've got Darkrai with Fury Belts too, but even if you're being two-shot by those, they're still winning the prize trade.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, although granted some lists cutting one or the other of these, they still have Xerosic and Megaphone to get rid of Fury Belt, so that's an issue as well.
Yeah, exactly. As much as it loses Ranger, it does gain two things that are kind of cool. One is Special Charge, to recycle the double dragons.
Yeah,
which
it does gain that. Yeah.
And Ninja Boy is the other thing, actually, for this deck.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned that because I want to go on record right now as saying Ninja Boy as a card is just absolutely bonkers.
It's absolutely insane. I love the thing so much.
It's so. In fact, I'll recite a little anecdote. I remember reading the scan for that card for the first time, and I thought to myself, "Oh, this is pretty cool." They reprinted Swoop Teleporter. That was an item which did a similar thing back in the day, but it didn't work on the X's. But I thought to myself, oh, it's kind of nerfed, but it's not. It's a supporter, so you can play it under item lock, but you can't, and you can use it with VS Seeker, but you can't, just do it as an item.
Yeah.
Then I read that it worked on the X's, and I had a minor heart attack.
Yeah, no, the options that thing actually provides now that you can use EXs, it's ridiculous the amount of combinations you can create with this thing. Big one for this could be Latios EX. Like, if you're playing Latios in your list, you can get it out so much easier. You don't even have to start with it. You can start with, like, a Hoopa and still get it, the Latios.
Yeah, and it's funny because that, in a way, Giratina, that win condition is taken away a little bit from the deck against Night March. But now, if you go first and you start with Latios or your Ninja Boy into it, then you just, if they start jolting, you can just donk them. So it's, of course, it isn't.
It's a little less consistent than the original way to be Night March, but hey, it still works sometimes.
And you can donk more consistently now with it. That's the main point.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, even if you did get a donk and then the Latios doesn't get knocked out, you can like Ninja Boy it into a Giratina and then attach to that and Chaos Wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
The things Ninja Boy gives you are just crazy. One last question about Dark Giratina: play it with or without Garbodor?
That is a good question, isn't it? So, from what I remember, the general trend at US Nationals seemed to be almost like a bit of a mix, but trending more towards the version with Garbodor, I think.
Yeah.
Because it has a lot of merit because, of course, it means in the late game, what a lot of Night March lists will do now is they'll play 4 Shaman and they'll keep 1 or 2 in deck so that when they get end, they still have 1 left to search for. If they have a Garbodor out, that of course no longer becomes an option. So that sort of late game strength and making N a lot more powerful really gives Garbodor a lot of credibility.
Yeah, and as much as we said it loses its main way to beat Night March, it's still got 2 other ways now that it can beat it with the late game ends and stuff like that. So it's not completely impossible to beat Night March with this thing.
No,
I think Garbodor was initially kind of put in, I assumed, to sort of help with the Greninja matchup, but it's sort of after testing it and seeing the other decks in the format, Garbodor has a lot more uses. Like against Metal, you will just destroy that deck if you have a Garbodor in play.
Yep.
Against AquaBox, even shutting off Manaphy's or Hoopas if you get it up early enough. I mean, that thing's like crazy good against that. Vespiquen Vileplume or Trevenant if you're lucky enough. So it might actually be worth the 2/2 or the 1/1 line even.
Yeah, there's a lot of merit to it. I think if I was to play Darkrai Giratina at Worlds, I would play Garbodor. I think there's just too much going for it to not play it at this point.
Yeah, I think there are some matchups that it just sort of changes into your favor, like by such a huge margin that it's definitely has to be considered.
Agreed.
All right, so would you expect Giratina to make top 8 or do well in any capacity at Worlds?
I wouldn't necessarily expect it to make top 8, but if it did, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
I think it will be more of a surprise than some other decks, but I think it's definitely still a strong contender, and I think anyone who knows their stuff with it and has a solid list, I mean, yeah, it's got some great matchups. Night March might be a little more difficult now, like we said, but against everything else, and you still have a winnable Night March matchup, it's a pretty cool call.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
All right, so that's Darkrai Giratina. Onto the sort of more fringe ones. First one's going to be Metal. We were just talking about how Garbodor kind of annihilates this thing.
Yeah.
Which isn't good because like literally every Pokemon except Bronzor has an ability in this thing. Except Bronzor Break, but whatever.
Yeah. So with this deck, I recently did a video on the top 10 most impactful losses from rotation, and Bronzong was of course on there. And what I said in the video was the rotation of Bronzong almost feels like a bit of a close but no cigar sort of deal, because we just saw Simone Zucchelli, who was able to top 2 Italian nationals by playing this. But ever since then, it doesn't really seem like it's done as much, and it has a lot going for it. So it's a shame, really.
Yeah, it is a shame that this could be its last chance to actually shine, really, and it's not looking good for it, I don't think. It's still got good all-round matchups in a sense. It might still struggle against Night March unless you can get like Aegislash or Assault Vest and Fury Belt on the Aegislash and forcing some really complicated plays from your opponent. But at the end of the day, you're still probably going to bench Shamans, and you're still got you're still playing EX Pokemon against non-EX Pokemon, and that just inherently is super in Night March's favor.
Yeah, I think what my conclusion on this deck would be is this: if one player, say for example Simone Zucchelli, who played it and he feels confident enough in his playing ability with it to just again take it to day 2 and just have a good run with it, I feel like it actually could have a decent shot. And the thing is about Simone as well, I had the pleasure of interviewing him twice at the Italian National Championships, and his eye for the game is really just something else. You can really tell that by the way he builds his lists and by the way he spoke about his decisions into what went in and how he actually plays. So yeah, and he's currently number 1 in Europe as well on championship points. So if someone like him would decide, you know what, I think this has a decent enough strength across the board to actually make it viable to play again for Worlds, I would not be surprised at all if he made top 8.
Yeah, but that's very true actually. Simone Zucchelli is number 1 in Europe with very good reason. He's an extremely strong player. The list he came up with for Genesect that sort of came out of nowhere was absolutely fantastic. And really, it's very different from just someone else just randomly picking up the deck and giving it a go. If anyone's going to do it, it's going to be him.
Yeah, one for your fantasy drafts, definitely.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, one for the fantasy draft. Yeah, I don't know, I'd be surprised to see Metal top 8 with like anyone other than Simone.
Yeah.
So the other kind of sort of fringe deck then is Frogs. This has had an Entei-like rise to fame and sudden fall, where it's still technically a good deck, and it can still feel like at times that it's just super unbeatable. But a lot of people just know how to beat it now. A lot of people have sort of figured it out. And I think if you're playing it, you really want a variant that just can almost guarantee a win against Night March. And to do that, you probably have to run like the Bursting Balloon variant.
Yeah, which is just not really the best build of it, I feel.
No.
And then the other problem with Greninja as well is that I feel like out of all the decks we talked about, it's the one deck that loses to itself the most.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
and it's just, and it's a shame because well, when you think about why that is. So with Steam Seed, Greninja gained N, which is really great for it because it gives it more shuffle draw. But at the same time, Greninja is one of the decks that is itself the most vulnerable to N because it doesn't play Shaman. So, if you haven't got a decent enough board state set up by the time you get N to 2 or N to 1, then you're just losing that game.
Yeah, and plus if you get End, you lose all the water energy that would otherwise be in your hand for your abilities. A good friend of mine, Rory, who you probably know if you've watched a couple more episodes of the podcast, he played Frogs for UK Nats. He was practicing Frogs for 2 months before that tournament. We played hours of Frogs mirrors with each other, and it was absolute hell. But all the games that he lost, or most of the 99% of the games that he lost, he just said to me, like, look, you could have been playing a theme deck and I still would have lost that game. Because he just had Lone Froakie and a handful of terrible stuff.
Yeah, and then that is just how Greninja loses.
That's just how Greninja loses, exactly. To get around the end problem, we've seen some players playing Octillery. I would advise against this, personally.
The fact that the one biggest thing that just alone just makes me think I would pretty much never play Octillery and Greninja, 2 retreat costs.
Yep.
It's just such a pain to deal with.
And like from a deck that, like, the ability to use it, you need to be in the active spot. So really being even just Lizond and Pass is just a big issue for that. I mean, Floatstone, yeah, but that's even more spaces you need to cut.
Yeah.
I've seen a list with Olympia in it, which is kind of cool because it's a switching card for using more giant water shurikens in a turn as well if you need it. But ultimately, it sounds pretty clunky to play.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So as cool and all as it would be, I think it wouldn't be a huge shock if it did top 8, but at the same time, I'm not expecting it to.
Yeah, I'm not expecting it to either.
Yeah. It would take a very good player and a very patient player. You're probably not going to play any mirrors, though, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a bit of a benefit, at least.
All right, so the decks that I think have I don't think anyone's expecting to do well. Mega Ray, look, it's a great deck. It hits huge numbers, but it has the most horrific Night March matchup out of, like, anything.
Yeah, and not only that, but the only way you beat Night March with that deck is you reduce yourself to the game state where you AZ up all everything and you've got, free lightning or a lightning and a double colorless attached to a Jolteon. And then they play Pokemon Range and you lose anyway. So
yeah, the 1 in 100 chance you have of beating Night March is now just impossible to do anyway. So they have to prize not Ranger now. That's really the only way that it can actually be done. Look, when over 50% of the play is going to be Night March, it's very hard to recommend Mega Rayquaza.
I would be shocked if this deck made top 8. I would put more money on something like Mega Gardevoir top 8ing World over something like Mega Rayquaza at this point.
I would actually agree with you on that one. And if they did, I'd be like, okay, what matchups did you get, man? And how did you avoid Night March for all those rounds? Yeah, look, it's kind of sad, but hey, next format, it could have its chance to shine without Night March being a thing.
I think next format is actually going to be really, really good, but I mean that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, a complete discussion for another time. But yeah, it'll open up a lot of good things because I mean, with all the decks that we've actually mentioned here, the first thing I've said is, oh, but it loses to Night March. So
it's almost a catchphrase, isn't it?
It is a catchphrase. The catchphrase of every Pokemon TCG player in the world. Oh, but it loses to Night March. Yeah, it kind of sucks that. I mean, I like Night March a lot. I've played it a lot. It's one of my favorite decks, actually. I find it really fun to play, but you cannot deny it just affects everything you bring to a tournament. Like, you cannot bring a deck to a tournament without considering its Night March matchup, no matter how small or big the tournament is.
Yeah, that is the thing about it. It is so impactful in the presence it has in that way, so that if you go into any tournament not thinking about it, then you were just being underprepared. Really.
You're either going to lose or get very, very lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same kind of thing goes for Mega Manectric. Another really cool card. One with like lots of different lists. I think Canadian Nationals was won by that absolutely wacky list with like Trevenant EXs and Giratina EXs. So it's a really fun card and it can perform really well. But Night March.
Yeah, but Night March. I would be less shocked if this did well over something like Mega Ray, to be honest, because I think this has a little bit more going for it in that avenue. But yeah, again, I just don't really see it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, oh, but you can set up a Giratina with basic energy, but Pokemon Ranger.
Yeah,
so it doesn't work anymore. But yeah, it will be nice to see it. It will be nice to see it get some cool matchups in top 8 with a really wacky and really colorful list. But I can't see it happening.
Maybe we'll see.
That's a very big maybe, I'd say.
Yeah, it's very, very big maybe.
All right, so I think that's all the decks that I wanted to talk about. Was there any deck that I missed, or any deck that you wanted to cover?
I think the only other thing that is probably worth bringing up is the unknowns, and by the unknowns I mean decks that have come out specifically from Steam Siege. So I'm talking, we've already mentioned Mega Gardevoir in passing, and also anything Volcanion based. The problem with these is that they literally day one of Worlds will be the first day any of this stuff is legal. So it's completely unproven, and maybe if something out of Steam Siege specifically does well, it will be some really good player just concocting something in like a corner of the basement or something and just mulling over everything and just thinking, how can I make this work? Because like I said, it's just unproven. There's no way to see beforehand from official tournaments what decks from Steam Siege will do well.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And even like you said, Volcanion, inherently Night March, like it's
Yeah.
EX Pokemon. I mean, your only non-EX attack option was the mini Volcanion. Do you think that's enough to pull it through against Night March?
I mean, it's definitely how you'd approach that matchup. You'd just go aggro with that one and just try and spread some energy around. But even then, to get knockouts on the Night March Pokemon, you'll need the EX Volcanion on the bench to make the first attack do enough damage anyway. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Which sucks because this will be like the one standard tournament, the only standard tournament where you can play Volcanion with Blacksmith.
Yes,
So-
yeah, exactly.
Which is unfortunate that it's probably not going to get that moment to shine. Mega Gardevoir was the other one you mentioned. Really the only one of only 2 archetypes, and no, I'm not considering Mega Steelix one of them, to come out of Steam Siege. But I've been testing Mega Gardevoir an awful lot in post-rotation. I think it's really cool. I actually think it's a lot stronger than people give it credit for. But in standard, Night March. And I can't see a way that you could make it that it could beat Night March. Because even if you Despair Ray and discard your Shamans on the bench, that's really cool, but Target Whistle exists.
Yeah. Actually, there's a point I forgot to bring up when we were discussing Night March in the beginning. You mentioned Target Whistle. Something interesting about Nick's list, which I really did not agree with at all, was that he did not play Target Whistle in his nationals, US Nationals winning list with the Vespiquen friends.
Like, yeah, no, I saw that list, and that is honestly, it's my favorite list that I've seen all season. And I was like, look, he won the biggest tournament in the history of the card game. But I'm going to take that list and I'm going to put 1 Target Whistle in it.
Yeah, 'cause that card just wins games by itself.
I have lost count of the amount of games I've won with Night March just because I played 1 Target Whistle in it. It's ridiculous what you can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to Mega Gardevoir, it's just this will also be in a similar vein to Volcanion. This will be the only tournament where you can play Mega Gardevoir with Dimension Valley, so you can actually attack for 1 fairy energy.
Yeah.
But I don't think it does enough. And even discarding all the stuff on the bench with Target Whistle, and even then, just Mega Gardevoir, I think is a bit too easy to KO. So
Yeah, like even if you're 2-shotting it, you're still winning the prize trade as Night March.
Yeah,
And that sucks. So, and no, I can't really see any way of it being super viable. But hey, that's fine. We'll stick to the decks that we know and love, and the decks that have been proven themselves throughout the last whole season.
Yeah.
So that's all the decks that we wanted to cover. What do you think is going to win the World Championships? Very difficult question, or unless you just want to say Night March.
Night March really would be the easy answer, wouldn't it?
It's the easy answer, but is it the correct answer?
Is it? Okay, I'll say this. I think Night March is going to win Worlds rather, but with the caveat that it's going to be a very different list / build from the one that won US Nationals. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think I'd be agreeing with you on that one. I mean, the Quen line that he ran was just 4/4 Vespiquen. And as much as that list was really set up to deal with the mirror, which is really cool because obviously the Night March mirror is going to be quite big in this tournament, I don't think you need such a thick Quen line maybe for going into this tournament. And
I feel like the thick Vespiquen line was more to deal with stuff like AquaBox. Because obviously the weakness to grass means that Cyberstone gets very easily one-shot by Vespiquen.
Yeah. But no, I could definitely see the list that wins Worlds just being something completely different than anyone's thought of even so far. Because, the one that won Nationals was completely out of nowhere. Like, no Trainer's Mail was just unheard of at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
So for me, I think the deck that's going to win, this is kind of a bold call. This is a really out there call. But I'm going to say it's going to be some kind of non-EX Dark variant. Something like straight Zoroark, or something like even with one Yveltal EX or something like that for AquaBox, which really helps out in that matchup. Just some kind of dark deck with a player who really, really knows what they're doing, and has been practicing with it for ages now, and is really able to get the most out of it and take on whatever comes their way.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, to be honest. Again, someone like Scott Burgess or Ryan Morehouse, who've just been playing in this so long and just knows how to play a deck like that inside out. If someone went deep into a tournament with a dark variant like that, would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, no, I assume it'll be like, I assume it wouldn't be someone who just picked up the deck like the week before, because I don't think you can do well with dark if you pick it up the week before.
No, definitely not.
But yeah, those are our picks for the World Championships, and that's going to do it for the preview. So Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
It's no problem at all. Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, no problem, man. And best of luck with the World Championships.
Oh, thanks, I'm going to need it.
We'll be rooting for you anyway, man.
Cool.
All right, so see you later.
See you later.
All right, guys, that is going to do it. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back every Thursday, 5 p.m. British Standard Time, as always. We're back on schedule now, so sorry about the random schedule that we sort of had over the last few weeks. Once again, huge thank you and good luck to Nick as well, and you can check out all of his outlets. I've linked them all down below. I even did a video with him myself on his channel about sequencing, so if you want to see that too, I highly recommend you check all that out. It's all down there. If any of my listeners are going to the World Championships too, best of luck to you as well. Let me know how you get on. That'll be pretty fun. So anyway, thank you so much for listening once again, and I'll see you next time.